Hello people, this is Vishal from Edureka and I welcome you all to this introductory series of ServiceNow sessions. Today we are going to take a look at ServiceNow from the developer's perspective. And when I say that, I mean we would be understanding something called as workflows in ServiceNow. But before we get into the details of ServiceNow workflows, let us quickly take a look at today's agenda first. Well, I'll be starting things off with what is ServiceNow and why it is so popular as an ITSM tool. Then I would talk about what are workflows and how to create those using a workflow editor. Then I would discuss workflow activities and what are different types of workflow activities. Then I would give you a demo on the scripting part and how the workflows work. So this pretty much sums up today's agenda. So let us move further and get into the nitty-gritties of ServiceNow. So what is ServiceNow? Well, ServiceNow is a software platform that supports IT service management and it automates common business processes. Now, what does this mean? Well, when you say ITSM or IT service management, it is an umbrella of various activities. There are quite a few domains and those domains cover different activities. To name a few, we have change management, service management, we have process management, we also have incident management. All these activities, they are very prone or not prone or very central to the companies working or a business is working basically. And all these activities can be taken care by using IT service management tools. And one of the most popular tools is ServiceNow. Why? Because it lets you automate these processes and hence it is so effective. Now, if you want to know more about ServiceNow and these activities which I just mentioned, I would highly recommend that you go through the other videos that are there in this series because those talk about ticketing tools and the admin responsibilities which ServiceNow has. And that way you would be able to relate more to this video. Not that you cannot right now, but that would actually add in more value. Having said that, let us move back and continue with our discussion. It contains a number of modular applications that can vary by instance and user. Yes, ServiceNow lets you create applications of your own. Those can be customized to meet your particular needs. Now, who founded ServiceNow? Well, it was founded in 2004 by Mr. Fred Luddy, who is the previous CTO of popular companies like Peregrine Systems and Remedy Corporations. So which companies do use ServiceNow? Well, there are quite a few companies in the market that have already incorporated ServiceNow. To name a few, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Dell, we have Barclays, and so many others. So what are workflows basically? Well, workflows are nothing but they are series of processes. Let me give you an example. Say for example, I have to create particular records or I have to go ahead and create employee records in my company. What happens here is I would be having particular fields that are common. Say for example, I'll be having name, IDs and all those things, which would be repeating again and again. There would be some features or some attributes. Say for example, your role, it might vary. So what happens is the fields that are common and which are entered, those can be actually repeated or implemented automatically by implementing automation. So this is what ServiceNow lets you do. Using workflows, you can automate a sequence of processes and implement those quickly and better. Now, this workflow is sequential and it has a start step and an end step basically. And the activities that get implemented in series in it are something that hold the workflow together. Say, for example, when an activity or a workflow starts, it starts with a begin condition. Then it goes ahead and checks in for a particular condition, whether that condition has been met or not. And if that condition hasn't been met, it decides the further flow of your workflow. And accordingly, it finally terminates. So when does a workflow normally terminate? It terminates when it runs out of activities to implement. Now we would be going ahead and taking a look at how a workflow basically works. So you would be understanding this part a little more once we start doing that. So let us go ahead and first take a look at the editor which a ServiceNow has to offer. Basically, an editor is nothing but an interface that lets you implement or create these workflows. Important point which you need to remember is as far as ServiceNow is concerned, now there are quite a few access laws that have been implemented by ServiceNow. Say, for example, there are few operations which can be performed by particular users only. Say for example, an admin, he performs activities like elevating roles or maybe impersonating a user. Now, as far as impersonation is concerned, that is something only an admin can do. So when it comes to workflows, not all can create a workflow. It has to be the system admin who creates the workflow, or the workflow admin basically. So he's the person who goes ahead and creates the workflow. And once it is published, then it is available for others to view or see. But once a workflow is published, it cannot be edited. So once I get into the editor, I would be talking about this part as well. That is, once we've created a workflow, I would talk about the publishing part and the checkout part. But yeah, this is more or less about the editor, as in it is used to create workflows basically, and it can be created by using only an admin. Once it is published, it is available to other users to use it. And the last step, I believe we've already discussed that in the previous slide. So this is how a ServiceNow workflow looks like, or the editor basically. And what you see on the canvas is your typical workflow. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and switch to the editor first, and then I would talk about all these points. That way I feel more connected with you people. So there you go. This is how a ServiceNow instance looks like. Now, we have already talked about this in the other videos, but for people who are completely new to ServiceNow, let me tell you that in order to access or to work on the ServiceNow interface, you have to make sure that you have an account on the ServiceNow website, and you have to go ahead and request an instance. So how does it work is you have to go to the website. On the right hand side, you have something called as a developer's portal, and you have to go ahead and log into that developer's portal first, and then you have this page is something that would appear, or this tab at least. You have to come here, click on manage, and request your instance, and a developer's instance would be granted to you. All they would ask you is they would ask you for the version which you want to select. Now when I say version, now you can see the build here is Jakarta, which is the version of my ServiceNow. Now there are quite a few versions which ServiceNow has. It's funny how they name it basically, or it's interesting, not funny. What ServiceNow does is they name their instances alphabetically, starting from A. If the first instance is with A, the second would be with B. So accordingly, they have instances till J, and which is Jakarta, the latest one. Now these names, those are named behind some cities or in reference to some cities. So Jakarta is also a name of a place basically. And if I'm not wrong, we also have the latest version which is called as Kingston, which is again named after a place. So that is how ServiceNow names its versions or builds. So I would be going ahead and using the Jakarta build because I have been using it for a long time, and it is also the second most recent. So we shouldn't be having any problem using Jakarta. You are free to choose the version you want to choose. This is the URL. Once you click on this URL, you would be taken to the page where, or the interface basically, where you can work on ServiceNow. Apart from that, it says the remaining inactivity is 10 days. Now, if I don't use my ServiceNow instance for 10 straight days, my instance would be released and given access to somebody else, because there are a lot of people who request for this instance. But don't worry, if you just go to the manage option and you request an instance, you would be having an instance to use. Having said that, now let us move to the interface. Yes. So basically, this is how the ServiceNow interface looks like. You have your banner, you have your filter navigator, you have your workplace, and I'm logged in as a system admin basically. There is also a chat box that lets me chat with other people, but that discussion is for some other time. We are not having a discussion on that for now. Having said that, we have this filter navigator, and I would be using this filter navigator to go ahead and continue with our activities. So let us go ahead and just look for workflow. So I type here workflow, and the workflow editor comes in suggestions. So I go ahead and select the workflow editor. Yeah, so this is how your workflow editor looks like. These are your canvas tabs. Only one is visible right now. The other tabs would be visible dynamically when you open a workflow each time. Say something like this, right? Yeah, and this welcome tab, it basically gives you the names of by default workflows and also the ServiceNow documentation, which is available for your reference. You have something called as a new workflow tab, by which when you click on it, you can go ahead and create a new workflow. There is a plus sign here which does the same for you. And we have something called as published, checked out, and help. So what are these? As I've already mentioned, unless and until I publish a workflow, it cannot be accessed by other people. Say, for example, users who cannot create a workflow, but they want to view one, they'll have to wait for a workflow to be published, else it won't be visible for them. And once it is published, the other thing that happens is you cannot make changes to a published workflow. In order to make changes to a workflow, it has to be in the checked out state. And to do that, what you have to do is you have to go to the workflow, and there would be a particular tab which is available, say here. Now you don't see publish here, but once we create our own workflow, you'll be having that option there. You can publish your workflow, and at the same time, you can also check it out. But not everybody has this access to checking out a workflow. There are access specifiers, as I've already mentioned. So people who have access to it can go ahead and can check it out and then make changes to a particular workflow. Having said that, this was about the tabs that are there. Now you have the help option where you can go ahead and search for documents, which would help you with the ServiceNow concepts or some problems which you're facing. Then you have your workflow palette tabs. Now this is your workflows, which gives you the details about the workflows like this tab does. And there's your core tab, which gives you the core activities. Now these activities will only be visible to you once you create a workflow or open a workflow. So we would be going ahead and doing that. So bear with me till then. These are called as palettes basically, or in simple words, these are just list of workflows. So this was about the workflow editor, as in the tabs and all that it has. This thing on the other hand is called as the title. And this part is your canvas where you go ahead and create your workflows. There you go, your canvas opens. So let us now go ahead and create an activity first. What I'll be doing is I'll be creating an activity or a workflow, not an activity, sorry, a workflow. What this workflow would do is if we assign a particular group to a particular record, it would make sure that this record is assigned to a particular person. Now, what is this record? What table are we going to use? And all those things I would be talking about that once I give you the demo or once I finish creating the workflow. So let us go ahead and first create the workflow. Let me call it, say, auto acknowledge. I would be using a spelling with double G. And the reason I'm doing this is what ServiceNow does is when you have instances which already have similar values, at times it goes into a redundant state and does not make my workflow run. So, and I'm stuck without knowing what has gone wrong and why my workflow isn't working. So to avoid that, I normally try to use names that I haven't used already. So I might have used this name somewhere. So I'm just using this name to avoid the ambiguity. Also make sure that each time you log into your ServiceNow, or if you are already logged into your ServiceNow, make sure that you go ahead and refresh your ServiceNow instance. Why? Again, it does not get into redundancy. Now I would be going ahead and using a table here for records sake, and that table is called as incident table. Now, why am I using an incident table? Well, once we move further, you would understand that. Now, I've been using this term that you'd understand that. Let me just finish this part. I'm very sure that all that I've taught till time, it would be more relatable to you people. So, yep, incident table description, it auto assigns a user to a record. And this is something that is called as the condition builder. Now, when I say a condition builder, this is what we have here. Now, there's something called as none. That is, if the none condition matches, or if there is no condition that matches, go ahead and do the following task that is mentioned here. Now, what I've selected here is run the workflow always. That is, no matter what happens, make sure that you always run the workflow. So I would be going ahead and assigning a particular group here. What incident table does is it gives you predefined records, and there are a lot of records and tables that are created. So you have access to those. So you don't have to go ahead and create fields. That is one reason why I selected the incident table here. So when I say assign to, I would be selecting a group actually, an assignment group, which is say cab approval, and I say submit. Now, as you can see, my workflow has been created. It is a simple workflow which begins with a begin step and an end step. Now, this is not a complete workflow. Yes, I've assigned a so-called group to it, but what activity do I need to perform? To do that, I'll have to go ahead and set a value. So how do we do that? We pick up the set values activity and it is available in the core. Now, as you can see, the core palette has these activities available. Back when we saw it, there was nothing visible here. Why? Because no workflow was open back then. Now that a workflow is open, yes, all these activities are here. So I would be needing the set values activity basically. Now ServiceNow gives you drag and drop facilities, so you do not have to worry about getting into tedious tasks. You just pick it and drop it. And there you go. Let us say I call it acknowledge 2, just to avoid ambiguities again. And I set in particular values to it. This time I would be assigning it to a user. And the user would be, say, what are the options do I have? Can I have someone with some name, say, yep. So I would be selecting a name called as Ron Kettering. You can go ahead and select other names as well. But for now, I've used this for reference. And let us add a work note. It is always wise to add notes because that kind of gives reference to other people. There you go. And I say submit. Yeah. Now we are lucky that this workflow has run smoothly. At times what happens is, as I've told you, it goes into a redundant state, and even after doing everything correctly, it does not work properly. Now this workflow is created by me and it has been checked out by me, so I can make changes to it. I can click on these icons and edit the code if I want to. I can close it by clicking here. So yes, I have these options. And there you go, you have other options as well. You can go ahead and publish it, you can delete it, you can enter inputs and all those things. This is the tab which kind of gives you the properties. Yeah, so as you can see, we have the general properties. Now these general properties kind of go ahead and take in the input values, as in what is the name of the table, checked out state, checked out by whom, and all those things. Conditions. Now we've talked about the condition builder, as in you have to specify your conditions that have to be implemented. This is what this tab does basically. Then you have the input tabs, as in what it does is it kind of lets you define optional workflow level input parameters. Now that is a discussion for some other time. Let us skip that for now. We have something called as activities, where you can go ahead and pin in few activities or define new activities and give in details about those activities. You have something called as your applications, where it talks about the scope of your applications, where it is accessible and all those things. Schedule. This deals with the timer activities. We would be talking about timer activities in the future slides. Estimated runtime and all the details about your workflow. So this is what it does. So yep, that's pretty much is about the properties. So this is your workflow. Let us go ahead and just test this workflow whether it's working or not. So I come here and in my filter navigator, what I do is I go ahead and I type something called as incident, and I have this option here, create new. I click on it. Let us go ahead and select a name, say Abraham Lincoln maybe, who is the caller. Okay. And I have some software issues. I say the issue is say mail, and I say please look into it. I would be adding an assignment group saying say cab approval. Now it is not assigned to anyone as yet, but when I just submit it, yeah. Now as I submit it, you can see that this Abraham Lincoln query, cab approval, it has been assigned to Ron Kettering. So we did not have to assign it to him. It got assigned by default. Let us go ahead and create one more activity. Say this time it is Abel Tutor, and he has some hardware issues, say CPU problems. Assign group, again say cab approval, and I say submit. So please fix my device by Abel Tutor. It has been assigned to Ron Kettering. So what is happening here is, when I say an incident table, what incident table does is it kind of acts as a table which records all the incidents. Now what are incidents? Say for example, my system isn't working or I have some problem which needs to be communicated to a particular team in my company. So what I do is I just go ahead and type in an incident, and this incident, it gets kind of allocated to the respective team. So the workflow which we just created, it kind of helped us control this allocation or assignment basically. So what it did was, if there was some issue related to your so-called cab approval group, now the queries which I put in for cab approval group weren't relevant because a software person or a software issue person won't contact the assigned group called as the cab approval. But just for the reference sake, imagine that If a person who has some issues with the cab approval or cab duties, and if he puts in an incident and he selects the cab approval group, now that activity would by default be assigned to a particular person. And say, for example, the cab authorities, they have someone named Ron Catering who takes care of all those duties. So by default, these activities would be assigned to him. So this is what your workflow is doing here. What it is doing is it begins when it does, it makes sure that if a new incident comes which is assigned to a particular group, it can be assigned to some other group. So yep, that pretty much sums up the process of how workflows work. I hope you all have understood what workflows are. If that is the case, then we can just move further and try to understand the next topic of discussion, which is activities in ServiceNow. So yeah, now let us go ahead and try to understand what are activities in ServiceNow, or workflow activities basically. Now these activities, they're nothing but they hold instructions processed by a workflow. You can you can imagine this as more of containers which kind of hold few instructions. And what do these instructions do? Now they let you manipulate records and also perform scripts. So why do we basically need scripts in ServiceNow? Now, ServiceNow is more of a click and point kind of an interface, but there are a few actions which need to be triggered externally. And to do that, we use scripts. So now these activities, they can be added, removed, or rearranged. You would be seeing this example, don't worry. Once I create the workflow, I would give you a demonstration. That is once we are done with it. And workflow conditions determine whether the activity is performed or not. This is something that we've already seen. So these are the types of activities that are there. We have something called as approval and rollback. Now these activities let you basically approve a user or a group for a particular assignment. Now we've seen that already in the previous example. Unless and until, but this can vary a little. Say for example, I want a particular workflow to only work when it has been approved by a particular group or a user, and I can assign those kind of activities to my workflow. This can be done by using approval and rollback activities. Now, few of these activities, they basically have some limitations, as in they're implemented on a particular table only. Now, as far as approval and rollback activities are concerned, they can work only for those tables that extend the task table. Now, if you take a look at this task table, you can imagine it as something of a parent table when it comes to Java or any object-oriented programming language. Now, we have something called as inheritance, where a particular table is inherited from a particular parent table. Now, in this case, your task table would be a parent table, and only the child tables of your task table can implement the approval and rollback activities. Then we have something called as the condition activities. This again can be related to your OOPS or object oriented concept. Say for example, we have these basically control structures. Say for example, if else, while, for loop, and all those things. Similar functionality can be implemented in ServiceNow by using your conditional activities. Say for example, it has something called as an if activity. Now we would be going ahead and taking a look at one of these activities once we start the demo part. So bear with me meanwhile. We have something called as notification activities. Now these activities notify your users with messages and emails, so that they can be given notifications as in this has happened or that has happened. Notify activities are similar to your notification activities, but you can actually go ahead and make calls as well. And you have to make sure that it always corresponds to a table called as notify underscore call basically. So that is the only difference between these two activities. We have other activities like the subflow activities and task activities. Now, subflow activities basically are those activities that are created by some other workflow. Now, say for example, a workflow is creating another workflow or an activity. And what it does is it waits till the implementation of that particular workflow or activity gets completed. And then it goes back to its initial functioning. So this is what subflow activities are. They can be accommodated in a particular flow. You have task activities. These activities help you in creation of tasks and activities related to it basically. Then we have something called as a timer activity. Timer activity basically help you control the time or the duration between one or more activities. You can add in more gaps or delays between two activities. Say for example, I want a particular activity to execute only after a delay of 2 minutes after activity B has been implemented. So this is something that can be done using your timer activities. And then you have something called as utility activities. Now, these are the activities that provide you with controls over the path of the workflow. And also they provide you with some other useful tools which can be used to edit your so-called activities better. So this was more or less about the theory part about the activities. Let me tell you one thing, that these activities have subtypes, and each of these have quite a few subtypes. But we won't be taking a look at all those activities. What I would do is I would just introduce you to a couple of activities or scripts which actually implement these activities. And those activity scripts basically are most widely used or more commonly used activities is what I should say. So we have something called as types of activity scripting, and those types are, we have if. Now if is a conditional activity which I've already mentioned, and what it does is it lets you select a particular flow for your workflow. Say for example, if condition is met, take this flow, else take the other flow. Then you have something called as wait for condition, as in wait for this condition to occur and then proceed with your workflow. You also have something called as create task, which helps you creating tasks while you're implementing your workflow. You have something called as a run script. We would be implementing a run script. It basically helps you to initialize a particular workflow or a particular activity. Approval group. Unless and until you have an approval of this group, you cannot proceed probably. Same is with the user. And we have something called as the timer activity. Now, as far as a timer activity is concerned, what it does is it again goes back to the thing which we discussed, as in it helps you schedule your so-called activities or add in the values in the interim or the time delays in the interim. So this was about the types of activity scripting. Let us move further and take a look at a demo that would talk about these activities in detail, or at least one or two of these activities in detail. So I would be quickly switching to my editor now, and then we can continue with the demo part. Now what I've done is I've just gone ahead and just opened my so-called editor. Let us just go ahead and create a workflow now. So what I'll be doing is I would be referring one of the, or I would be taking reference from one of the sessions taken by Mr. Bell in the ServiceNow community, and I would be using his reference to go ahead and create an if activity that actually helps you kind of distinguish, or I would say create paths for your so-called workflow based on the color inputs which I given. Once I start coding, you'll understand this part. So I'll walk you through with the coding part and also the flow of the so-called application or the workflow. So let us go ahead and do that. So let us start by giving it some name, say demo for if condition maybe. Yep. And I would be going ahead and selecting a global table. Now, why do I do that is when you go ahead and select a global table, what it does is it lets you create a workflow and see its output in the same interface or the canvas. So that is why I would be going ahead and using the global table sample. I won't be putting in too much values here. And I would be saying none here. Why? Because I would be going ahead and scripting. So since I'm using a script externally, I do not need to set in a particular condition. And I say submit. And there you go, a basic workflow is created. Now I would be needing to have little more space because we would be having more than one activities today. So yep. Now let us go ahead and use something called as a run script. Yeah, so I would be using a variable to initialize my so-called workflow. Let this be say init, and in order to initialize that, I would be using this piece of code which says workflow dot scratchpad dot trigger, and I would be passing in a value say red because this is the by default color input for which I want my so-called system to react or my workflow to react, and that pretty much does it. You do not have to type anything more. Now one more thing you need to understand is you need to have some basic prerequisites or some basic understanding of scripting or Java scripting in particular, because all these scripts in ServiceNow they work in JavaScript. And I say submit, and there you go, my run activity has been successfully added. Now I'm going to go ahead and add an if condition which comes under the conditions workflow or the condition activities. Here it is. I just pick it up and I drag and drop it here, and there you go. So let us call it say demo reference, I'm trying to use different names again to avoid ambiguity if there are similar activities that are running behind. And now I click on this thing called as advanced. What it does is it lets me script. So this is how the basic if script looks like. To a particular variable, you pass in your script and you encapsulate your script in a function. So let us go ahead and create a script of our own. So I say workflow dot scratchpad dot result. This is the variable which I would be using. Dot and the name of the script which or the function which I would be using. So it is if script. There you go. Now I would go ahead and create a function to encapsulate these values. Say yep, there you go. And first I would be going ahead and declaring a variable which I have just used already, or I have already used it. So it's result equal to, in curly braces, I pass in my values. Say red is equal to false, comma, other colors would be blue, which is equal to say false again. We have green again equal to false. And I have say a none condition which deals with the values that haven't been used yet. So there you go. Now I would be assigning a global scope to all these values. And how do I do that? I say global. Again, I'm using a package called as JSUtil, which is a utility package in JSUtil. And if it's not nil, just go ahead and use my so-called workflow.scratchpad. There you go. Yep. Now we go ahead and enter our so-called if conditions. So the first if condition says if workflow dot scratchpad dot trigger, and index of is kind of a method basically. Now what ServiceNow does is it invokes something called as a glide form, which lets you do servers basically client-side scripting. So what it does is it lets you invoke quite a few methods, and those methods perform a lot of tasks for you. Index of is one of those methods. What it does is it returns the index value for you. Now in this case, if the index value is red, then go ahead and display a value for me. And what that value should be? It should be display the value for the red trigger. So it should be result dot red is equal to true. There you have it. Now I go ahead and I enter the scripts for the remaining part. Again, I pass in the result. This time it has to be blue. You can actually go ahead and copy this piece of code and re-execute it again and again, but I avoid doing that normally. I like typing the code. This time it is green. Again, result dot. There you have it. Now we need to go ahead and put in a condition that would kind of work when all of these conditions aren't working. So that would be our none condition. There you go, which is equal to say these values, which is not equal to result dot red, result dot blue, and result dot green. So in this case, return result. There you have it, and my script is done. Say submit. There you go. So I have a workflow already. So if I just go ahead and run it, as I've told you, it gives me output here and here. That is why I've used the global table. Oh, it says there's some error. Let me just quickly take a look at what the error is. So you just click it here and open this piece of code. There has to be some error somewhere. There was a spelling mistake here. Let me update it and let me see whether it works perfectly now. If not, again we'll debug it. Okay, there is some problem in the flow, but let us just go ahead and do other activities. I can just go ahead and do this. Now, this is basically yes, but I want a different value here, say red. And I want this piece of code to look a little different. One, this has to be skip during generate always. Never kind of forget to tick this because else your code would go into a loop and it won't give you the desired output. So say workflow dot scratchpad. There you go. Dot result dot red equal to true. I'm going to copy this piece of code, Control A, Control C, and update my set accordingly. So this now becomes red. Similarly, I'll go ahead and make this no as blue, as in when the value is no, go through the so-called blue flow. Control V, and it is already ticked blue. Update. Now I need more activities. How do I add more activities for my other colors? I right click on this place, and if I wait for 2 seconds, this is what I get. Add condition. I say green. I come here, I take this part, I add this, and I say green. And then I go ahead and I say none. Take this again, Control V, and here I say none. Submit. I want all these activities to correspond somewhere here. So there you go. This color is glowing now. Why? Because that is the by default value which I've set to it. So can I just go ahead and make other colors glow? Yes, if I say that my run script should have some other value, say for example, it should go through the blue channel. I update it and then I say run. There you go. My blue channel is showing an input. So based on the input conditions, you can actually go ahead and make changes to the script that you have. Say for example, I can have multiple conditions here. I can go ahead, I can give a space and I can add red condition here. Or I can just go ahead and say copy paste and change these values and change their values as well. So I can do that as well. So what it would do is, depending upon the condition which you pass to this so-called workflow, it would take in a particular path. Now, when my script runs, what it does is it triggers a particular variable, and if that variable is corresponding to any one of these values which matches with the initial condition, then that flow would be taken by a so-called workflow. So this was more or less about the if condition and how the if condition works. Now, if you come here, there are quite a few other predefined workflows which are available to you. Say, for example, you have something called as, now these are random. So I'm just going to go ahead and click. You have your run script, you have your if script here, your run workflow, you have approve action, which comes under role, means rollback activities and the approval activities. You have your approval action again and the end condition. Now there's a script here basically which you have, but I cannot edit it. Can you tell me why? Because these have been published. So if I have to use it, I'll have to check it out first. And yeah, and then I'm good to go ahead and use these activities. Now can I make a change here? I can. But let's not do that. Yep. So you have these activities, and if you just go ahead and take a look at the other workflows, you'll actually be able to see how the scripting works for all these activities and how to actually go ahead and script for these activities. There would be sample scripts available and all those for your references. So I believe that you all would be good enough to go ahead and take a look at those scripts as well, one by one. As far as this session goes, I believe we've talked about what workflows are and how to create simple workflows and how to add script to a workflow as well. However, one important point which I would like to state here is you have to always make sure one thing: use scripts only whenever it is required. Yes, we have condition builders and you can build conditions normally as well. You do not have to script always. Whenever a script is required, you can go ahead and you can use script as well. So I would suggest that you go ahead and kind of practice these things. We also have other videos on ServiceNow Developer, and I suggest that you go through those videos as well. Those talk about client scripts and all those things, where you would learn to make basic applications and all those things. So probably those videos would also help you to be in a better state. So if you did like this video, make sure you like the video and leave a comment if you have any questions or you just feel like appreciating the video. So this probably is the end of this session from my end. I would be around and I would be creating another videos as well. And if you do get to see those, do let me know in the comment section how you felt those videos were. So this ends the session here. I would be taking an adieu, or I would be saying bye here. Bye bye. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!